We're learning Hilchos Chanukah per Gimel Halacha Vov. V'olei Halal shel Chanukah bilvadu. We're discussing Halal of Chanukah. We'll go down to the Peirush HaMeir. When he talks about Halal, he's telling us now, the Rambam, that Halal is the Rabbanon. As we mentioned before, it's one of the 7 mitzvahs the Rabbanon. But Kriyas Halal is always Divrei Sefer in all the days of the week. Shegoyim b'en is Halal, that you fix with it the Halal. There are 18 days in the year. There's a mitzvah to end the Halal. You say Halal Sholem, all of it. These are them. Shmoynes Yemei Chag. Sukkot is 8 days. And the Rambam is going with the year because on Rosh Hashanah Kippur you don't. So he doesn't start with Rosh Hashanah Kippur. Then you have Shmoynes Yemei Chanukah. It's another 8 to 16. First day of Pesach, because the rest of Pesach you don't say Halal, complete Halal. And V'yom Atzeres, which is Shavuos, one day. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur Ein B'hem Halal. V'shem Yemei Tshuva V'yira Pachad Lo Yemei Simcha Yisera. That's Yemei Simcha Yisera. And they didn't establish Halal in Purim because the Megillah is the Halal. The Raiva disagrees. Amar Avram. Yesh B'hem Asei Midivrei Kabbalah. He says that it's not the Rabbanon, it's Divrei Kabbalah. It's an intermediate category from Divrei Nevi'im, because it says in Yeshayahu, Hashir Yir Lochem Keleilas Kaddish Chag. This is the pasuk that's used for Halal. It's a mitzvah same Divrei Kabbalah to say Halal. Now, L'olam Divrei Seifrim, the Rambam says that it's always Divrei Seifrim. The Maggid Mishnah, Chayetz Brochus 14a, in the middle of Kriya Shema, you can stop in certain places, and certainly in the middle of Halal, you can stop in those places, which is only the Rabbanon. And since they didn't say which Halal yes and which Halal not, that would prove that Halal is always the Rabbanon. Brings a raya to the Ravid. There's a same with the Divrei Kabbalah. Sheneviim tiknu. The Neviim are masakin Halal al kol tzorah shenigalu mimenu. On any tzorah that they were redeemed from it. And he explains that Machon said which days to say. That the Nevi'im said which day, the Machon said which days to say it. The Gemara brings Hashir Yilochem Keleilas Kaddish Chag. Regarding Halal, it's only a siman and a dimion, the smachul dimion, but in actuality it's drabbono. But the Nevi'im Mitzakin, that's what days it should be said. Maggid Mishnah cites further. Ushmoin also Yom, we find in Erchen. And there they explain why you don't read Halal or Rosh Hashanah Kippur and Purim, just like the Rambam says here. One is because of Yimei Din, and the other one is because the Megillah is in place of the Halal. This is a continuation of Halacha Hey. And as he starts off, where is he talking from? Because we mentioned Halacha Hey, that Kriyas Halal is a mitzvah with Divrei Sefer. She might think he only meant Chanukah, so he emphasized it's any Halal. B'nai Binyamin, so in the Klei Chemda, point out why that you can make a brocha on mitzvahs with Divrei Sefer. He says he's saying, like he mentioned on the Megillah, why didn't he say like Ner Chanukah itself? Why does he mention you can make a brocha on why do you have to bring a raya from one rabban on the other? And furthermore, why didn't he mention you make a brocha on mitzvahs with Divrei Seifrim b'dinei Megillah, regarding Megillah? And we can answer that he wants to emphasize that when we say Vitzivonu, it's not a proof that Halal is not Rabbanon. Still you say Vitzivonu. Therefore he says, like you mentioned on Megillah, that even on Megillah, which is already part of the Nevi'im, so you see we say Tzivonu Midrabanon. The actual reading is Midrabanon. So it shows it goes back to that period of time, which emphasizes, in fact, what he says before that we mentioned that the Nevi'im Tiknu went to say it, but the Halal was already a Rabbanon even before the Nevi'im said when to say it. And you say Vitzivonu, Because why? Because it says in Rome 17:10. You have to listen to the Chacham who instituted it. Now, when we go down below again, we continue. Because the Mishnah on the Ravid has an essay Medivei Kabbalah, writes, it would seem he's disagreeing. He asks that we find by the Rambam Divrei Seifrim and Divrei Kabbalah are intermingled. He uses them in sometimes this way and sometimes the other way. And furthermore, we have an Erchen. It says we learn from the posuk shiur that it would seem that it would be a mamish a raya. The Rebbe would agree that it's not medivri. So if the Rambam would have a raya to the Rebbe, would admit to the Rebbe that it's not medivri sefer. And at the end, the Mishnah says Zedas Rabbeinu. That this is what the Rambam feels. But in Sefer HaMitzvahs he writes that you don't count in the Atari mitzvahs mitzvah rabbanon like Mikra Megillah. And if we're talking about that it's Divrei Kabbalah, why does he call it a mitzvah rabbanon? And he goes on into this question. We're going to skip further to the next page. The Bahag is of the opinion that Kriyas Halal is not midrabanon, and it is counted in Taryag mitzvahs. Baal halachos gedolos. The Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs disagrees. You don't count the midrash mitzvahs something that's drabanon. As he writes in Sefer HaMitzvahs, you should know. Kizeh, we'll turn the page. That this is something that one can disagree with, because we find in the Talmud that the 613 mitzvahs, the basis of 613 mitzvahs is found in Makis. And how can you say it's Drab? How can you say that it's Rabbanon is considered counted in it if it's all Moshe B'Sinai? Therefore, we have to say, and many people have been mistaken with this. Ner Chanukah, Mikra Megillah, I think they think it's the Raisa. Because Kriyas Halal is something that we take from Tehillim, which David HaMelech wrote. Ner Chanukah was in the second Beis HaMikdash, Mikra Megillah, and he wants to explain that Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu b'Sinai that when, in a sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu the future, so therefore it's considered a mitzvah deraisa, and he says that can't be the case. I can't believe that one will think this way, that we were commanded through Moshe b'Sinai that later, when things will take place, you should do it. And the Rambam says that they came to this mistake because you say Asher Kitchanu Toisav Tzivonu. And how do you say either on Mikra Megillah or Hadlokas Neiros or finishing the Halal? The Gemara, they ask, V'hechen Tzivonu? They say from the Posuk Loisosu. And that is therefore why it's Minat Torah. It's true that listening to Rabbanan is Minat Torah, but it's one mitzvah, and you can't count everything that the Chacham enacted as a separate mitzvah of the 613. Just to clarify, we don't have an exact count of the 613, which they are. We know the 613, and the 3 or 4 or 5 that count the Taryag mitzvahs have a disagreement, and the Rambam replaces, for example, Mikra Megillah with a different mitzvah to come to the level of 613. And by the way, if you count every positive and negative commandment in the 613, you'll have many more than 613. But some of them are subheadings of other mitzvahs. Furthermore, he mentions in Chulin in 106a, it says To wash your hands is a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? It's a mitzvah to shmoi devei Chachamim. Like they say by Megillah, Ner Chanukah. He explains that this is all clarified. What the Chacham established after Moshe Rabbeinu was all of them in the Rabbanan, even what the Nevi'im established. From the Eruvin, that when we find that when Shlomo HaMelech enacted the idea that you can't carry in a carmel, so he made Eruvin until he died that the hands are tomei for bread, and you have to wash your hands. Baskel came out and said, "Im chochem b'ni yismach libi gamoni." If my son is wise, my heart is gladdened. Now, everyone knows that Eruvin is Drabonon. There's Yadayim is very safe from Drabonon. So from this we see that everything that's enacted after the time of Moshe Rabbeinu is called Drabonon. And he explains it, because you shouldn't think that Mikra Megillah, since the Nevi'im established the Megillah, it was done al pi Chagai, Zecharim, and Malachi. So you might think that it's literally deraisa. So you should know it's not. It's the Rabbanon. Even what Shlomo and Beis Dinoi also established Eruvin as the Rabbanon. This is what the Gehazi Mishnah basically says in the depth of his words. The Ramban says, in his cheshbon, in his reckoning of the mitzvahs, he says, I'll tell you, the mitzvahs that they founded, the Chachomim and Nevi'im, like Ner Chanukah and Megillah, are also not, according to the Ramban, they're not counted. Like we find in Shabbos, somebody who is mad like Ner Chanukah, he has to make a brocha shekit shalom zayzot tzivon lahadrik Ner Chanukah. Av Yoma shetzivonu comes from Eloisosor. That's not from the deraisa of Eloisosor. We know the Rabbanon. Nachman says from Shalav Yichav Yaged Chazak Yinach V'Yemuloch. What do your elders teach you? And all the xeris, all the limitations of the Rabbanons we rely on the fact that we have to keep them because of Eloisosor. So too the mitzvahs that they established, like Ner Chanukah, are based on Eloisosor, which is a deraisa. Now Yitzchak disagrees only on Syogim, like Mrs. Klayim, that has an Iker and Torah, so he wants to say that that's part of Eloisosor. But mitzvahs that Achom themselves enacted, they don't have a smach only b'shalav yichav yaged chozek yinecha v'yemuloch, which is a lesser magnitude than the first one. And the reason for this is clear. Shedvorim, the things that they added in the mitzvahs, we go to the next page, themselves, they explain, the Mevorshim explain the Torah, like Tzemah Pishtim, Chaim, Ushvus, Melocha, Chayovim, you have to believe in Torah, Kefi Shepirsh HaChomim. That's part of Eloisosor, meaning the oral tradition. When they say light candles, nobody will say that this has to do something with a mitzvah in the Torah, and therefore it's not considered included in the posik. When you don't know what to do, you ask, and they will tell you, and you have to listen to them, which is Eloisosor. That's what the Ramban says. On a mitzvah that they established, like Ner Chanukah, there you have the posik Shalav Yichav Yaged Chozek Yinecha V'Yemuloch. If they tell you what to do, you have to listen to them. And there are those who are saying, and you wouldn't say V'tzivonu on mitzvahs Zekanim, on this posik, but we do. The Ramban, on the question of the Rambam, how the Bahag could say that Moshe commanded us about Hallow when only David HaMelech wrote it. We didn't even have it till David HaMelech came along. He answers that the Rambam himself says so by Tefillah. There's a mitzvah to pray, because it says, and Tefillah is a mitzvah deraisa, that's for sure. But with Talmud Muvah, and in Talmud you find Tefillah D'Rabbanan. That meaning that Anshe Knesset HaGdolah enacted how to say the brachas. They used to pray in a different fashion. It's hard for us to comprehend. The Rae even says that the different nuschois of the davening are based on each of the shvotim had a different nusach. But the Rambam himself says that you have to pray every day, but the number of tefillahs in the nusach is not menatur. That's what the Chacham told you to do, and that they davened from Moshe Rabbeinu till Ezra in their own fashion. Ezra Ezra and the Sanhedrin of his time, that Machon Nesher HaGadol, established 18 brachos. Thus we find that the Rambam himself explains that there could be a mitzvah which later was enacted in a certain form. And why then is he bewildered by what the Bag says, saying Hallel? How can you say that Hallel is at the time of Moshe, when in actuality it was only written by David HaMelech at the time of his Tillim? The answer is that Klal Yisrael had to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he took about from Mitzrayim B'Kor Yom, and David HaMelech gave us the order how to say, so that we'll be able to say it throughout the ages, just like the Knesset HaGadol enacted prayer. But the actual obligation to pray, to praise Hashem, that's Minat Torah. And just like praying is every day. Here, we're going to say it briefly, and we'll just skip most of it. The Ramban adds, even we say, in Gelikeno on Shabbos, we say, Asher Shalavim O Yoimrim. That's from Tillim. So what did they do in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu? So was that shiur already there, and Dodd wrote it in Tillim? Because we find many things like that. He says also we have Tefillah Moshe, which is found in Tillim also, and from Mizmor Shiur and Shabbos, which Adam Rishon made. We'll go to the next page. Therefore, the Ramban writes, it would seem from all of this that it's Minat Torah. If you'll ask, where in the Torah do we find they have to say Hallel? This we received from Moshe and Sinai. And whenever there's a time that we have to thank Hashem, it's our obligation to say Hallel. Or it could be Simcha. It says, V'yem Simchasem v'yedaychem v'osher chotshechem v'skatem v'chatzoyzois al yosechem al zivchei shalmechem, that you have to say Hallel. That the main idea of shiur is not thinking, but rather singing, saying. And the players who play only help the song that's said. And even though we have to say the shiur on the korban, saying it when it's not on the korban is also part of the simcha. But on Rosh Chodesh, we don't find in our Torah that you have to do it. Only those days when you finish the Hallel, that's a chiyuv in our Torah. In Erech we find that the reason it says in the Posuk, why will Klal Yisrael Chas Hashem be punished? Because they didn't serve Hashem the Simcha B'Toiv Leivov, which is Avodah Sheb'Simcha B'Toiv Leivov. This is shiur, and it could be that he learns that Yom Tovim, where we have the Simcha, you have to chayiv that you should have a shiur in it. Aval Hallel is not midrabanan, because they said it even before David. He asks from Kriya Shema D'Oraisa, if you stop in the middle of Kriya Shema for certain things, certainly Hallel, which is Rabbanon, you definitely stop. So you see that Hallel is not D'Oraisa. So how can he assume that it is a D'Oraisa? So we have to say the Maggid Mishnah knew that you can stop in the middle of Hallel of Hanukkah. But he says that the Gemara says Stam that that's always, which would seem to infer that Hallel is always the Rabbanon. The Ramban Nachmani says that the Bahag will explain the contradiction, that they're only referring to Hallel of Hanukkah, and those days when a Yochid doesn't complete Hallel, that's when it's the Rabbanon, not the Oraisa. Ravid asked the question in the Rambam, since it's learned from a posuk, Ashir Yir Lochem Kalel L'Skadish Chag, that Hallel is like a deraisa. The Brisker of Chedushi Grizz brings down from Psochim 1:16b. The Nevi'im amongst them established they should say Hallel on every situation that took place, and every trouble that we overcame, that it should not happen. And when we were redeemed, we say Al Gulosan. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for our redemption. Thus, the Nevi'im established it when? On a holiday or in any trouble. And the Maggid Mishnah makes a difference between Regel, Lao Kol Tzorah. Here, we just wanted to say that the differentiation is whether or not it's a Yontif or Chanukah, which was a Tzorah. And he answers the question, he replies to what the Ravid says, is a posuk Ashir Ha'iyah Lachem, that it may be according to the Ran, who says in the name of Rae Gann, you shouldn't make halal, you don't make a bracha on the halal and leil Pesach, ligmar is a halal. To complete it, she'ena kriya. It's not reading, but rather a shiur. And therefore, we are obligated to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for his salvation. And on Pesach, it would seem there's two types of halal. That which is said like shiur on the night of Pesach, you don't make a bracha. And if I going that a halal b'leil Pesach, there was no bracha. The second bracha of kriyas halal, that's midrabanon in the 18 days, they did make a bracha like Racham made for every rabbanon a bracha. So therefore, you could find that on Pesach you do not make a bracha during the other night of Pesach and the other days of Pesach, whereas on those Chanukah, when they told you to make a bracha, when you had to say halal, then you do have to say halal. With this in mind, we can explain that what the Ravid says, Ashir Yelochem Kalel L'Skadish Chag, that it's talking about the halal of shiur Kalel L'Skadish Chag Pesach. It's only midrabanon, because you don't make the bracha, because that's the part of shiur, which is at night you don't make the bracha. The Rambam is talking for his halal in the 18 days, where you do say it as a kriya, and it was meant to be read, and not as a shiur. And they made a bracha on that, and that's why there is a bracha. And so we would see from Hilchos Chametz and Matzah, they don't say a bracha on halal of leil Pesach when you're eating the Pesach like a Rae Gann. Why? Because Ashir Lachem does not talk about halal of the 18 days, and those 18 days, they is a separate aspect of saying shiur, and on that they did enact a bracha. And he goes ahead and explains the Rashbam and Rashi. What does it mean? She'll call perik v'perik. It's talking on different times of the year. That means on Yom Tov. Al-Kol Tzor Shlei Tovoi is a separate one of Chanukah. And therefore, Halal b'Chanukah is like Halal in the Regolim, because they established it in the same idea as the obligation on Yom Tov. Let's go to the next page. We're skipping the double columns, but basically the discussion here is what's the difference between when you do say a bracha, you don't. The next page also goes further into that discussion. What's the difference between the different halals that we say, even whether you say Leil Pesach or you don't say Leil Pesach. And then we go to the final page, and Nimtzu, we find that there's two reasons why you don't make a bracha on, when you don't make a bracha on halal. One reason is that on the Leil Pesach, you stop in the middle of the meal. And the other reason is because it's not obligation to read it then, but it's rather a shiur and thank you. So the Grizz asks the question, why does the Mordechai include them together then if they're two different types of reasonings? And he wants to say that they both have the same source. Since you stop, it shows it's not kriya, rather shira. And therefore, you can speak in the middle, or you can eat the suit in the middle. That's why Leil Pesach, you don't have a brocha. And Tosis Rosh, he brings down that we find many shiros without yayin, like Hillel, like Halal, B'Shritas Pesach, where they said Halal, and also Leil Pesach, and all the Milchamas that we were redeemed from them. Rav Grizz, the Grizz asks the question, why doesn't he mention the 18 days of you finish B'hem the Halal, and he doesn't say it on the wine? So we see that these three are called Shira. The other ones, the 18 days when we read it, that's Kriya. And there's a differentiation between saying the Halal obligation, just like saying that reading the Megillah, and the obligation of thanking Hashem. And that's the difference of when you have to make a brocha or you don't have to make a brocha. The Rambam is very careful to write the Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, they don't have halal because they made Shuva Yir of Fachad, not the base of Simcha Yisrael, of happiness. So the Muki Rae cites that since on Rosh Hashanah it says Ched v'Z Hashem imuzchem, that the love of Hashem is your strength. And a medrash we find Sosim Usmechem Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, Rambam points out that they're not the way Simcha Yisera. They obviously have a Simcha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to forgive us for our sins, but it's not a Simcha which is beyond, without bounds, and therefore you don't say on the Halal on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. In summation, the question of Halal D'Oraisa D'Rabbanan is basically that it's D'Rabbanan as to in the makeup of the Halal when it was said. It's D'Rabbanan according to the Rambam, and you make a bracha on it because that's the way that the Chacham enacted it, and actually according to the Rambam, on the when you skip part of Halal, you therefore don't make a bracha because it's not a complete Halal.